second, you should be on.
Right.
Okay, you're on.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Ron Whittle, and I'm chairing this meeting of the Corporate Parenting Specialist Advisory Group. This is the first time, and probably the last time, perhaps, if I'll be chairing this. There is I have to read out, under law, I have to read out a statement, because obviously normally we meet in the town hall and people can come in and sit at the back or, you know, join in. So what this meeting, this is a legal bit. This meeting is being held virtually in accordance with Part 2 of the Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panel's Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority and Police and Crime Panel Meetings, England and Wales, Regulations 2020, and the Council's Supplementary Council Procedure Rules. In summary, the regulations were brought in as a response to the coronavirus epidemic. They remove the equivalent for members to be physically present in the room. They allow us to debate, participate and vote through remote video conferencing whilst observing the social distancing measures needed to restrict the spread of the virus. Right, so in terms to try and make this work as smooth as possible, people shouldn't have me as chairing it, but anyway, please could people mute their microphones and turn off their videos at all times unless I've been asked to speak. I mean, I think maybe people have got some on because there's a lot of background noise at the moment. So please mute your microphone and turn off your video unless you indicate you want to speak. Remember to mute your microphone and turn off your video again when you finish speaking. You can indicate now or at any time that you want to speak. There is, if you're using Microsoft Teams, there is the meeting chat facility, and if you can type a message, and if you type a Q and send that message, then it will flag up on screen that you want to speak, and I'll, if I can, I'll ask you to, if it's, you know, obviously I can, I'll see if I can fit you in. If there's a vote, it's a small meeting, so I could ask if people object to a proposal, or we could ask people in turn. If there's no consensus, and there normally is, we don't normally have votes at this meeting, but if there is, then we can ask people to name themselves and say how they vote. A number of people, and I recognise a number of people, you're at a disadvantage because you're only able to phone in, and I do apologise for that. If you want to speak, you won't be able to send a message through Teams, obviously. So if you could pipe up and say, Chair, can I, you know, you'd want to say something. The other thing to remind everybody is that this is being streamed now. It also be on, people watch their P's and Q's. And with that, sorry, now that bit's all over, I'd like to, we have got, move on to the next item, which is apologies. And we have had a number. I'll just read these out for the record. Jane Ivory from Blackburn with Darwin, Claire Richardson from the CCG, Angela Allen from the Spring North Charity Consortium of Lancashire, Paul Lee from the Council Safeguarding, Aldo Staffler from Council's Children's Services, and the rest of these are councillors: Damien Talbot, John Slater, Councillor McFall, Councillor Sultan, Mohammed Khan, Stephanie Brookfield, Judy Slater, Maureen Bates, and it's going to be a bit late, and Sam Briggs. Has anybody got any other apologies that they're aware of? No indications that there's other apologies. Right, okay. So the next item, which is declarations of interest. Can anybody indicate or pipe up and say if they've got a declaration of interest to be made? No? Well, that's good. The next item, if Phil, you can scroll up a bit, is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on March the 2nd, I think it was. Oh yeah, March the 2nd, which seems ages ago now, given that we've been locked down for that period of time. But it was on March the 2nd, wasn't it? One of the latter meetings before we shut down. Anybody prepared to say that they're a correct record of the meeting? Come on.
I'm happy to do that, Chair. Councillor Julie Gunn.
Is that seconded by anybody? It was, you have to have been there, of course. So is anybody else? Right, thank you. That sounded like Maureen to me. But... Okay, the next item is the Vice Chair's update. Is the Vice Chair available?
Chair, it's Julie again.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that the Vice Chair is having some problems connecting. I haven't had a response yet, but that's what I'm assuming, unless Wendy or Phil have been told anything differently.
Well, okay, on that basis then, should we defer it till later on in the meeting? If she joins us, then we can fit her in later on. Does that sound reasonable to people?
Yeah, good idea.
Right, so we're belting through now. Corporate Parenting Dashboard, and I could invite Alison Hanson, if she's available, to introduce it. Over to you, Alison.
Can you just give me a second while I try and get it in front of me?
Right.
Unless Wendy's going to present it.
I will be sharing it. Just give me a moment.
Okay,
is this the pie charts and all that sort of thing?
Yes, yes.
Oh right, yes. If that would be useful, because it's a bit.
Yeah, you need to have it in front of you, don't you?
Yeah. Well, also, Alison, because some people are dialing in.
Yep.
They won't have the benefit of seeing the chart, unfortunately. So it'd be useful if you can, for each of the squares on the dashboard, if you could perhaps give the highlights really, because then then at least they'd have the narrative to work on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Thank you. Well, over to you then.
Yeah, I'm still waiting to see it. It's not in front of us yet. Oh yes, there it is.
Oh, I can see it.
Okay, thank you. Let me just make it a bit bigger. Okay, so this was our dashboard as of the 29th of June, and so what you can see in the first box on your left and the other one on the right hand side at the top is the number of children in care. So it has hovered around, it's 409 at the end of June, and it has hovered around that kind of number for a number of months now. I think that it's high at its highest. It was 412 in March, and I've been kind of, what I've tried to do today is to sorry, I've got a buzzing in my ear. I don't know where it's coming from.
Well, could people turn off their mics?
That's better, thank you. So what I've tried to do to present this today is to compare some of the figures we've got in front of us today with what they looked like at the end of in December, our dashboard in December. So you can see the numbers of children in care. They have been over 400 probably right through the year. The age profile of children has changed slightly since December last year, in that we have fewer in the 0 to 2 age range than we had in December. So it's gone from 86 in December to 71 now, which is quite a significant difference really, given the kind of numbers that we're talking about. We've seen an increase in the number of 3 to 5 year olds from 56 to 64, an increase in the 6 to 8 year olds from 45 to 52, and an increase in 12 to 14 year olds from 71 to 77. Now the other age groups are broadly similar. I'm going to ask Jeanette whether she can say something about why because I think the most significant thing for us is probably the change in the reduction in the 0 to 2 year olds. Jeanette, are you on?
Microphone's muted, sorry, I'm on now.
Okay,
yes.
Sorry.
So the increase in the number of older children entering care is an interesting one. However, I just think it's a bit of a fluke, really. I think I chair our Legal Gateway panel where we discuss all children coming into care. And yes, we have had some sibling groups, which therefore has shifted some of the spread of ages of children that have needed to come into care. But I would say that 60% are actually under 6. So the majority of our children that enter care are of that age range. The older children, I've looked at some of the profiles of those, and some of those are, we've been managing a lot of risk around things like exploitation, and some of those are the older end of some sibling groups where where maybe children have been suffering neglect for quite a period of time, so we've had to intervene at a higher level to support those children. But generally, I would say that the shift, I think, will perhaps swing the other way in the next few months, because I know from Legal Gateway panel more recently, we've had, for instance, this week, we've had 4 unborn children who are due in the next 3 to 4 months, whereby the risks are very high, and we will be initiating care proceedings when those babies are born. So that will show a shift. And there are other very young children that have been considered where they will be placed before the court quite, imminently. So it's difficult to kind of quantify everything, but what I would say is that I think the pendulum just swings quite naturally, and at the present time we have had a shift. But it's having the right children in care at the right time for me, and I won't, we won't shy from bringing older children into care if they are suffering significant harm. It's about getting that threshold right, really.
Yeah. So there is a pie chart then in the top row in the middle, which is about the age of children entering care. So the last box was about the profile of all the children in care, and this one is about the age of children entering care. So what we've seen is a reduction in the number of babies. From December it was 48%, and now it's 39% are aged 0 to 2. 3 to 6 year olds are the same as they were in December. That was 21%. In December, 11% was in the 7 to 10 age group. That's now 15%. In December, 15% were in the 11 to 15 age group, and 11% was 16 plus. That's compared now to 6%. But as Jeanette says, it might look very different again the next time we meet, because it is subject to peaks and troughs and all of that, really. Okay, Wendy, can you scroll it up a little bit, please? Thank you. So I'm not going to say too much about ethnicity because there's barely any change. The percentages look pretty much the same now as they did in December. 79% of children in care are white British, and 10% are Asian Pakistani. I won't go right through that table. But there are some changes in terms of where children are placed. So in-house foster care is pretty much the same, and we do have a high proportion of our children are in-house foster care placements. But the number of children placed with parents on care orders at home has risen quite significantly, from 58 in December to 79 now, and that is something that concerns us, really, and it is some work. We're going to do some work around that, because that number is too high, really. The number of children in family and friends placements. Sorry, I'm just kind of looking for my notes a bit. There is some good news around placements, agency placements. So that's placements with independent fostering agencies and placements with agency residential placements, and they are down quite significantly, and there are high cost placements, so that's good news for our commissioning budget. So we now have 22 children in agency residential. Now they are the very big cost placements, and they're placements for the children with the most complex needs. So it's good that we've managed to bring that number down. And the number of children in agency foster placements has come down from 62 to 50. So again, they are quite costly placements, so that's good news on the budgetary front. There's also been a reduction in the number of young people, and these are mostly care leavers, 16, 17-year-olds who are in residential accommodation that's not subject to regulation, and they come down from 18 to 12, and again they cost us quite a lot of money. So there are 3 kind of categories of placement there where we've made reductions, and that's very positive. We've had an increase in the number of children in adoptive placements from 13 to 24. That's probably, I would say, and I'm looking at Jeanette because I can see her face on my screen. I think that's probably as a result of the high number of babies we had coming into care and very young children coming into care probably earlier this year.
Yes, I would agree.
So it tends to be the much younger children that go into who go for adoption.
Yeah.
The rest, there's not a great deal of change. Destination of care leavers is broadly similar, with perhaps just a small increase in the percentage of children who leave care to become subject to special guardianship. The entering and leaving care table on the right shows that so in 2020 so far this year, we've had 56 children and young people enter care and 41 children leave care. So we've got a net increase of 15 children so far this year. Could you scroll up, please, Wendy? Thank you. So it's a little bit confusing because it feels like some of the data on this dashboard contradicts itself a little bit, but there are two boxes on the bottom left, and they are that shows our kind of annual data as opposed to the snapshot at the end of June, which the rest of the data represents. So the bottom left corner looks at children in care on 31st of March, comparing 2018-19 with 2019-20. So, and you can see from that the gender breakdown is broadly similar. There were 412 on 31st of March this year, compared to 403 the year before. As I say, the gender breakdown is broadly similar, but you can see the changes in age group as well, the age differences. I won't go through them again because you've probably heard enough of me saying 0 to 2-year-olds and 3 to 6-year-olds. And again, it shows the annual data for the ages of children entering care. I do think it's quite interesting that we went from that 0 to 2-year-old figure went from 47% in 2018, 18-19 to 37%. That's quite a significant difference, isn't it, in a 12-month period? Then we've got, I can't get rid of this control bar, sorry, and it's right on top of the, how do you get rid of it? Click on it, and then it comes back.
Keep your mouse away from it. Does that help?
Could you just scroll it up then, Wendy? Perhaps it'll just miss it, as I can't see it. Okay. So in terms of performance then, you can see from this right-hand corner box that we have 63% of children in foster care. That is low compared to the regional and national averages, which are the regional average is 67%, so it's not vastly different, but 72% is the national average. But then we do very well in terms of the numbers we have in our in-house foster care, which for us is 51%, and the national is 46%, so that's very good. And we also do only 12% of our children are in independent fostering agency placements compared to the national average, which is 26%. So that's quite good. We have more children in adoptive placements than the national and regional average. We have fewer children in residential schools and secure provision than the national and regional averages, which is good. But we are very high, we're an outlier really in terms of those children placed at home with parents, which we've mentioned earlier. Placement stability is an area for improvement for us really, and it is something that we are doing some work to understand better, but we have had a good start to the year, and when I do a presentation in a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about that. Number of care leavers that we're in touch with is 100%. You can't get any better than that. We are slightly lower than regional and national averages in terms of 19 to 21-year-olds that are in employment, education and training. We're kind of 2% behind in the national average. Again, that's something that we've had quite a lot of discussion about in the corporate parenting board, and something that we're working to improve. Sorry, I can't see it again because it's that bar's come back. Okay, I've got it.
Have you got it?
Yeah, I think I've got it. Our adoption performance is very good. Sorry, I've lost it again. The number of days, it's measured in days, and there's an A1 score and an A2 score. The A1 score, I think, is 426 days, and although we're slightly over that at 433, we're quite a lot better than the national average, which is 486. So that measure is how long it takes, the number of days from entering care to children actually being in their adoptive placement. So for us, that's 433 days average at the moment. They are actually just about to change the adoption scorecard measures, so we shall see. And then the A2, our A2 placement adoption measure, we're managing 162 days, and that's from placement order to matching. And that the aim is to do that in 121 days. But again, we are significantly better than the national average. I've got that bar again, I can't see.
Oh, that's like, oh, hang on. Asylum seekers.
Yeah, and that, yes, we've only got 2 at the moment that are in care.
Yeah.
And they're in foster placement that's long-term matched. So that's the dashboard pretty much. I think it's difficult, will have been difficult to follow if you can't see it. I apologise for that.
I got an indication from Councillor Brian Taylor, who wants to ask a question. Alison.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Wendy, could you just, I want to ask a question about the children, where they are placed.
Okay.
There are 2 sections at agency, foster placement agency,
Yeah.
and children's homes agency.
Yeah.
And you said they had reduced quite a large amount, and it's saving a lot of money.
Yeah.
But what about the quality of the care? Could you comment on that in the agencies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably variable, but I think what we have a number of mechanisms for making sure that the quality doesn't dip, really. So our independent reviewing officers have some responsibility for making sure that placements meet children's needs. So every time they have a looked after child review, you know, that is considered. And then our commissioning team have some responsibility to go out and do some quality checks on placements as well, particularly the residential placements. They go out and do a compliance visit just to make sure that those placements are able to run in accordance with regulations and national minimum standards. So our commissioning team do that. And then, of course, children, you know, social workers have statutory responsibilities towards children in care wherever they're placed. And so, you know, every time they visit and they talk to children and they talk to the carers, they are checking whether those children's needs are being met and whether children feel happy and safe in those homes.
Thank you for that response. Thank
Okay,
you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We've got a question from Councillor Maureen Bateson.
Thanks. Sorry, I haven't got a video link. Alison, can you tell us what the impact has been on children because of the court system being shut down, so that the impact could have been for longer, either in care, waiting for adoption or something like that? I know there's been...
Yeah, there has been some impact, Maureen. I think one of the impacts is that delays in the court system mean that children are sitting in foster placements much longer. You know, getting court hearings to make placement orders, for example, to start the ball rolling in terms of them going into their adoptive placement, that's all taking longer. So children are in their foster placements longer, and that is definitely creating a bit of a pressure for us in terms of placements. And the other thing, I suppose, is for children who might have a care plan of adoption, and it's not necessarily a court delay, but because of the difficulty we've had in doing introductions between the foster placement and the adoptive placement, that's also caused some delay for children. So there definitely has been an impact. We are managing it because we've developed some new risk assessment tools that are enabling us now to start moving children into their adoptive placements, or even if they're due to be rehabilitated home. We've done really good risk assessment to make sure it's safe, but we have moved a number of children now. We're not kind of just sitting on it. But there is definitely a pressure on placements caused by court delays.
And I suppose I could add, in terms of managing all those children that are in the court arena, that any contested final hearings, which they often are because they're massive decisions, parents will contest the granting of a placement order. Obviously, if it means their child is going for adoption, then the judges really want those contested hearings to be face-to-face hearings. So there has been some delay, and courts are now reopening, so they are prioritising in order of date those cases that are contested, in order to get them heard as soon as possible, but in priority order. But you're right, Maureen, that it has had an impact.
Yeah, we've got a number of children who are on care orders at home as well, where we're waiting for court dates to get those orders discharged and take them out of care. And I don't think they're top of the list of priorities, are they, Jeanette? We've waited quite some time for court dates for some of those children.
There have been waiting periods, but I understand now that the courts are attempting to try and prioritise those as well. It's getting the balance right. It's having the right children in the right placements, and subject to the right orders for the right length of time. So it's a battle.
Right. Well, are there any other questions? I'm particularly interested if there's people who are on the phone, right, and can't give me a message. If you want to ask a question, it's your opportunity to do so now. If you want to pipe up. If you don't want to, you don't have to ask a question. Just want to give you the opportunity.
Hi, it's Abdul here.
Hiya.
Hi, Alison. Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, Abdul.
Hello,
Hi.
Abdul.
Yeah, I want to switch my video because you can only see my chandelier. So, so my question is this: that how long does it take to discharge home placement when they are placed with parents? Would they rather not be on a child protection plans rather than home placement plans?
You mean at the end of the proceedings, when there's been a care order made?
Yeah,
when
they are placed with parents under home placement agreement, how long does it take to discharge them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the robustness of the actual assessment and the court paperwork that's submitted. We've had some very speedy ones recently that have had absolutely no contest, and once they're in the court arena, and the care orders. We've had a few sibling groups, actually, those care orders have been discharged. But it's getting the hearing that's the problem.
Right.
Legal are trying to push forward, and Judge Bancroft, who's our designated judge for Lancashire, has set aside some magistrate time for the magistrates' courts to hear discharges of care orders. So hopefully that will speed up the process moving forward.
Thanks. That was my question. Just to see.
Yeah. Okay.
I've got another question from Julie Gunn.
Thank you, Chair. And again, apologies. I don't know why my camera's not working this evening. But anyway, my question is related to what Abdul's already asked, really, Jeanette, but it's also related to the legal gateway. I'm just wondering, in terms of children placed on care orders at home, are we seeing a positive impact since you've introduced the legal gateway in the number of children being placed at home?
Not necessarily. What I would say is we are seeing a decrease in the number of children being subject to interim care orders, which means that we're not issuing as many care proceedings. 12 months ago, there were 114 children subject to interim care orders, and now we're standing at 83 interim care orders, which means, I think, that we're managing risk perhaps more inclusively with the services that we've got. We're making sure that every opportunity and every offer is in place for families to turn things round before we put things before the court. We're using our public law outline, which allows parents to get legal advice before we go into proceedings, so that they clearly understand the reasons why we are concerned and what they might have to do to bring about change. And that's working very well. I think, I'm not sure of the percentage, but I can get those figures, but it is quite high in terms of the numbers of children subject to that public law outline that do step down from that process and end up at child protection and then maybe child in need. So the numbers entering care are coming down and they're moving in the right direction. However, those children that do end up subject to care orders at home at the end of proceedings, I've just done a little bit of a quick piece of research around that. The last 15 children that were made subject to care orders at home, they range in age from 9 months to 5 years. So they're all very vulnerable children. And at the start of care proceedings, the threshold for significant harm was clearly met. And the care proceedings have ended with a care order. So you could argue they are still at risk of significant harm, but the courts have made the decision that they want us to support them in a really robust way in the care of the parents, because maybe the parents during proceedings have made every effort to work with us and their assessments have been more positive than we perhaps thought. And so we really do have to try our best to keep children with the parents, but we need to have an eye to when things are good enough after that to get them back to court to discharge the care orders.
Yeah.
So it's the whole process really from beginning to end. And I would say that courts are generally very reluctant to make placement orders with an idea of adoption. If there's a family member, then they're quite happy to consider a family member, but it's always a last resort is adoption, and at times we felt that adoption should be the plan, but the court have perhaps gone with a different idea, and they've perhaps fallen in favour of a parent. Very difficult judgment calls all of the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jeanette.
Okay, we've also got Councillor Simon Afsal, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the number of safeguarding reports that we've had during the COVID crisis. I know there's some figures there. I just want to understand if there's been a spike or if there's been a drop. And is it, compared to previous years? And part of the reasons why I asked that question, some of it might be we've seen a spike in domestic abuse, for example, and there will be children involved in those situations, and whether we've had to pick up some of that additional activity.
Yeah, I think Jeanette and I are going to do a little bit of a presentation about the impact of COVID after this agenda item. So maybe we could look at it as part of that.
No, thank you. That'd be
Is that okay?
Yeah,
okay.
Of course, thank you.
That's if we can present our presentation.
Well, I hope so.
Okay, are there any other questions before we move on to COVID-19? I can't. No. Okay, it's Alison and Jeanette again to talk about COVID-19.
Oh,
it's
right,
the Alison and Jeanette show.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, how do I share this?
On your floating toolbar, there's like an arrow. Can you see an arrow saying share desktop? I think it says.
It's like a square with an arrow in it.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
and then you just obviously if you've got it loaded down the bottom somewhere, you can just share that.
All right. Can anybody
There
see
we go.
that?
It will
There
be
we
in a
go.
minute. I'm just sending it now. There you go.
Okay. So can people see that?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Alison.
Okay,
Yes.
right. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so in terms of COVID then, one of the things we were worried about right at the start was placement stability, because obviously it's a big ask for care. It's been a big ask for carers really, in terms of looking after children. Some of them have got 3 or 4 children in foster care, looking after them 24/7 and homeschooling and you know, all the pressures that have come with that. So we were worried that placement stability would be affected by COVID. In fact, what's happened is that in April and May we had only one disruption during those 2 months, which is very good. And foster carers, residential homes, and children themselves have all proved much more resilient to the pressures of COVID than anybody could have anticipated, I think. So for the first 2 months of the year, placement stability was good. It's still quite good, I think, all things considered. But in June and July, we have started to see some cracks, and a few more placements have become fragile. I'll explain a bit later, but we've been rag rating our children in order to prioritise them for various kind of levels of support. And obviously the red ones are the children that have been struggling the most, and that number of reds has started to increase slightly. So I think you know, the cracks, it's gone on longer, hasn't it? And now we're experiencing this additional difficulty in Blackburn. And I think some children and young people are starting to struggle a bit. So currently we have got 6 placement searches ongoing, and that's for children where their foster placements are very fragile and they need to move. So the other thing that's been a challenge, and it's always a challenge anyway, where COVID or no COVID, is placement sufficiency. It is a challenge. Our in-house fostering service is constantly at capacity, and at the start of COVID it was at capacity pretty much. In April and May, demand for foster placements was low, so we had very few new admissions to care and very few disruptions. But in terms of the impact on placement sufficiency, that hold up of plans that Maureen asked about earlier, and children being in placements longer, has put a pressure on placement sufficiency. So in June we saw some kind of increase in demand, and where we have had a demand for placements, it's been very challenging to find anything. So I think the hold-ups that we're experiencing with court delays and children's care plans, so that they've been in placements longer, is replicated right across the country, and it's replicated in the Northwest. And what that means is that our agencies that we have some reliance on for placements, so the independent fostering agencies, have been inundated with demand really, and so they've been able to offer us very little when we've needed a placement. So at the beginning of July, certainly we've needed placements for a few adolescents, and when we've done searches, we've got absolutely nothing back at all. So it's been a struggle, and we've had to stretch our in-house carers and do a bit of begging and pleading, and we've managed to take care of the children, but it is starting to be a bit of a strain, I think. I guess the other thing about placement sufficiency that we were worried about was the impact on our ability to recruit new foster carers and recruit new adopters. But I think the position with that has been that actually we've had more registrations of interest in our foster carer recruitment campaign in Q1 this year than we had the year before, so I don't think it has been badly impacted. And in fact, in some ways, I think the kind of community spirit that people started to see kind of in April, May, particularly, you know, when people were out clapping for carers and all of that, seemed to generate some interest. People wanted to do something. you know, for their community. And I know that although we're not actually responsible in Blackburn with Darwin for adopter recruitment, I know that adopter recruitment taking place through adoption now has not suffered either. They've got exactly the same number of prospective adopters in assessment at the moment as they had the same time last year. So that's not been such a problem. So some of the other impact then has been on the emotional and mental health of children and young people. And I mentioned earlier that for the majority, for the first couple of months, they coped really well. Some enjoyed not having to go to school and have enjoyed homeschooling. So for some, school, you know, going to school is a challenge for them. So not having to go has been good. And for some foster carers, they've had, because people have been furloughed, they've had 2 carers at home instead of 1 carer at home, and children have enjoyed that as well. I think in June, July, one of the things we've started to see that's probably started to show some of the cracks is the impact of children not being able to have the direct contact with their birth family. The impact of not seeing friends. I mean, I guess the same in the general population as for our looked after children, but you know, that all of those things, loss of routines and activities, boredom, has been, you know, we've started to see children struggle with that a bit more in the last probably 3 to 4 weeks. And for looked after children, I mentioned the RAG rating earlier, it went from 24 reds in June to 37 in July. I think that's quite a big increase really in the number of children that we're starting to RAG rate as being more vulnerable. Again, the same for care leavers. Care leavers have been remarkably resilient, I think, through all of this. I know that some other local authorities have really struggled with their 16, 17-year-olds and placements breaking down, and we haven't had that. I think that's partly because we did get in very early with making sure that the most vulnerable ones had, you know, the highest levels of support, but they have been very resilient. But in June, July, again, we've had a small increase in the number of reds. They've struggled with not being able to have family time with the birth family, just like the children in care. As I said earlier, we have risk assessed. We have developed a risk assessment tool to enable family time to start again, and some are having direct contact now with families, some of them in gardens and going for a walk rather than in homes, but it is starting again. We just hope really that the new restrictions for Blackburn are not going to have a big impact on that, because I think now that they're starting to have more contact with families, I think it'll be hard to go back from it. We have had a few young people who've struggled with their mental health. Some care leavers struggled with mental health. And we've managed to get some additional support for some of them through Child Action Northwest, who offered us for no cost some of their capacity to work with care leavers. So we've had a few care leavers that have had counselling through Child Action Northwest, and they've been running some great stuff like cookery lessons and stuff online that has helped young people kind of stay in touch, feel less isolated. And we've had a small number of unaccompanied asylum seekers who particularly seem to be struggling at the moment. Concerns about children with disabilities, I suppose, because they are our most vulnerable in terms of their health. Those children with very serious health conditions, they've been difficult to support because parents haven't wanted people going into the home, and they've been shielding, not able to have short breaks, etc. So there's been a real pressure on families to cope with some of that. So we, like our other services, we RAG rated children with disabilities, and we prioritised 10 children for short breaks at apple trees. Those children are those with autism rather than with underlying health conditions, but they are children with severe autism who probably you would think were at risk of coming into care if they didn't have short breaks and fairly high levels of support. Some children with disabilities have not been able to access their health therapies like physiotherapy, etc., that they normally have. So you worry about their kind of, the impact on their general health. And right at the beginning of COVID, some of our children have packages of care through agencies like GS Social Care and Crossroads. And at the start, some of those agencies were offering much reduced packages of support, and actually parents didn't want them coming in anyway. So some children didn't have support for quite extended periods, but those agencies are operating now, so they are getting back to normal. So what have we done? We've RAG rated children, and we had a couple of reasons for RAG rating. One I suppose was because we were conscious of the need to not be visiting children and going into carers' homes where there was no need to. So we prioritised the children where we definitely needed to continue visiting, and staff have had PPE to continue visiting, and amber children, I guess, have had enhanced levels of Skype calls and virtual contact, garden visits, and the green children have had probably more telephone contact than anything else. We have, it's not just us that have been maintaining contact with children in care. There's IROs, social workers, school, virtual school, health service and other agencies have all been keeping in touch with children. We paid out some pupil premium to foster carers in particular to help homeschooling, and some of our children in care were also prioritised for school places. Some care leavers, we've had to provide some additional financial support, although I think after a while there was a decision made to increase the benefits. I think universal credit increased, and some care leavers benefited from that. I've mentioned Child Action Northwest provided some additional support. Our Revive service has also been maintaining virtual contact with carers and children and young people who've needed some emotional health advice and support. I've mentioned the family time, so for certainly April, May and most of June, children in care and care leavers had mostly virtual family time, and very little direct family time, which is very difficult for very young children. Kind of Skype calls and things don't really work for very young children. But we developed this risk assessment tool, and now we have most children are now having some direct family time as they did before. We were concerned about, I guess, if you think back to March when we were worried about having an increase in the numbers of children coming into care, maybe foster carers becoming ill, parents becoming ill. We felt we needed to develop a contingency for placements in case we needed additional ones. So we did some work at Whalley New Road, which was vacant, and made sure that that was fit to receive children if we needed to use it. We did the same with the Limes in Darwin. So that's given us kind of 8 additional beds should we need it, and we have used the beds at the Limes a few times. And I think somebody earlier mentioned domestic violence. We had a mum and a child in at the Limes for a while that was a result of a domestic violence incident, and we needed to get them out of the home. We used the Limes to do that. We've done some work at Apple Trees, developed an apartment within the unit at Apple Trees to allow them to care for maybe a severely disabled child alongside some of the autistic children, because they're quite hard to care for side by side. So to give us some additional capacity there, that work has just been completed. Then the government provided, I think it was 700 laptops to be distributed. The criteria was to any child with a social worker. So we have been busy dishing out laptops to children to help with homeschooling. We have a summer holiday programme now for children with disabilities. That's going ahead as far as I know, unless anything changes after Monday. So children with disabilities are going to be offered 3 days of support during the holidays. And some children will be reintroduced to apple trees. We did offer foster carers some additional payments to recognise the 24/7 nature and the pressure of what they were doing every day. And we also, through Adoption Now and some government funding, there is some additional support available for SGO carers through the Adoption Support, Post-Adoption Support Fund. So we've done quite a lot, and I think that the result of that really is that we've not had the negative, the adverse impact that we kind of dreaded at the start of lockdown. So I think the early support has worked quite well. And I think we're over to Jeanette for the impact on her services.
Yeah, I'll just add about the laptops. I think my team have been kind of managing some of that administering alongside education. And I think we're up to now around 500 laptops have been distributed. So that's good news, and that's to help children who are digitally deprived to access educational material on their devices. And we're even providing some the government are providing some routers for families who haven't got Wi-Fi already installed. So that initiative is just nicely off the ground. Right, in terms of the front door, our Children's Advice and Duty Service, initially at the onset of COVID, we were conscious that we needed to reach out to the public really to make sure that if families saw anything untoward or they had concerns about a child, that they knew exactly who to telephone in our borough in order to get the response that would be required to safeguard. So we were involved with our comms department, and word was spread across the borough via the shuttle, via social media, billboards, etc., to ensure that the public did know what to do if they were concerned about a child. And we have seen I want to say we've seen, I think it's around 11% increase in the number of referrals from the NSPCC. I suppose nationally that might be the go-to agency for people if they have concerns about a child. And we have had a solid number of referrals from neighbours and members of the public if they have been concerned. So I think there is some evidence to suggest that campaign has worked quite well. During the first month or so of lockdown, contacts were low into children's social care. During that week commencing, I want to say around the 30th of March, which was the first measurable week really in terms of the impact of lockdown, we had 120 contacts into children's social care, and of those only 8 referrals were generated. So that was it was 50% lower in terms of the number of contacts, and in terms of our conversion rate into referrals, that's usually around 15%. So I'm not good at maths, but it was lower than 15%. 8 was lower than 15%. They gradually increased, and by early May we were getting back to what we would say our contact rates were pre-COVID. By May we were having around 200 contacts per week, with around 25 of those generating a full-blown assessment and referral. So the conversion rate was probably how it was pre-COVID. However, since then, I want to give you some figures around mid-July. Again, our contacts have remained at around 220, but the conversion rate has been quite astounding in terms of converting contacts into referrals, which means that our children have an allocated social worker for an assessment to take place. That has increased to 57, so that's 27% of the number of contacts coming in have generated a referral. So for me, the conversion rate has increased significantly, and the complexity of the numbers of contacts obviously has meant that we have had to intervene. None of those have felt to be inappropriate, and none of those have felt to be unnecessary. So, you know, we are getting, like the lady was saying before, there is a steady increase in the number of referrals that are being generated. we do need to monitor that. Mid-July is always the time before schools break up, so there is often a natural increase in that week before schools break up, but I'm interested to see if that pattern remains high as it is now. And regionally, they're seeing similar patterns in terms of levels of referrals. So moving on to the next slide. Can somebody up the next slide? Safeguarding teams. Right, as Alison was saying about RAG rating, or red, ambers and greens, all children referred into children's social care are RAG rated as red when a referral is generated. That is until an initial assessment visit has been carried out. So all children where a referral has been generated, a direct face-to-face visit will be carried out, and the children will be seen and the parents will be seen, and a view at that stage will be formed as to the RAG rating thereafter. We're weekly kind of looking at where our RAG ratings stand. So all of the children subject to child in need or child protection plans, as I've said, were RAG rated. Red means regular face-to-face visiting. Amber is a mix between visits and virtual communication, and green primarily virtual visits and telephone calls and monitoring, as Alison has described. So it's been a universal system right across, used to make sure that we reach out to our most needy children in the most relevant way. Child protection conferences have been held virtually via Skype, but we are now hoping to move towards a blended approach to these meetings. So we're looking for venues that are big enough and suitable for parents and older children and the social workers and the IROs to congregate in order to have the conferences, but any partner agencies will be dialed in. So it's kind of moving towards more face-to-face contact, which is obviously more meaningful and helping parents to understand the reason for the plan, and having that face-to-face discussion is often the best approach. As I've said earlier, courts are now reopening across Lancashire, where social distancing will be observed for face-to-face hearings, but these will only take place in that respect if there's a contest. So it's often at final hearing stage where there might be opposition to the final care plan, where face-to-face hearings are being facilitated. And I just want to add that our staff have been absolutely amazing during this period. All the teams right across, they've all worked together to meet the needs of the service. Sickness has been very low. Self-isolating for those that are pregnant, for instance, has happened, but they've managed to work from home and do a lot of our virtual expectations, shall we say. And for those staff who have been exposed to the virus, whether that be directly or where they're showing symptoms or where they've been directly in contact with others, then we have used the testing facilities, and these have been prompt, and staff have been of the mindset always, how quickly can I get back into work, how quickly can I support our children as best we can. So it's been a difficult time. I don't think we'll ever return to exactly how we were, and we are looking at fresh ways of working really. What's worked well during COVID might well be harnessed, and we might well be doing things in a different way, because I think I would add that our compliance hasn't dipped, and how we've reached out to children hasn't really had a huge impact on the statutory requirements of our agency. Thank you.
Right, that sounds really. I mean, I'm amazed. Like you, I was fearing that during the lockdown, things will get very bad, and there will be a lot of suffering for children, which is what we really don't want. And it sounds like a lot of staff have put, as you say, a lot of staff have really put themselves out to make sure that didn't happen. I'm really pleased with that. Anyway, any questions or comments on that? Any of either of those two presentations?
I have some questions and comments.
Maureen, you can come in, yes.
It's not Maureen, it's Paula Quinn.
Oh, right, sorry. It's just that Maureen. It's all right, you go first.
Sorry.
No, you're fine, you're fine.
Sorry, we've been on a phone. I can't tell what's happening, can I?
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, Okay, I just want, as a foster carer, and obviously representative of Foster Carers Association, there's quite a few points actually that I want to pick up on from what Alison said. Also, right at the beginning, I just want to mention that although I gave apologies for Sam Briggs at the beginning, she has actually managed to join the call, so you actually have 2 foster carers on the line now.
Yeah, I'm here.
You're there, okay. One of the things that I really wanted to pick up on is the fact that, I mean, despite Alison saying, yes, we've caught really well, etc., I think we just need to get that message across that it has been extremely difficult for foster carers, extremely difficult for different reasons. I myself have been working from home every day through lockdown, locked away in a back bedroom, which the kids find strange and keep coming into me, which I know you all have when you were working from home. I'm still working now. Other foster carers have had other experiences where they've got kids that don't want to stay in, the ones that want to go out, and it's almost been a physical battle of wills to say, no, it's not safe for you to go out, you know, when it was proper lockdown, or it's not safe for you to meet with your friends, etc. It's been really, really, really difficult for a lot of carers. Another thing that one of the main things that we've had queries coming through, because we have a forum and we get a lot of questions. We've had a lot of carers coming to us saying they can't get all the social workers, they can't get all the supervising social worker, they can't get all the manager. You know, we've been giving out lists of phone numbers and the email addresses for different members of staff for them to go try this person, try that person. So that's been a key problem, especially when they've got a crisis, the kid wants to go off to the dads or whatever, and they can't do for whatever reason. So that's been extremely difficult. We've also had reports of unannounced visits taking place when people have been isolating and things like that, and having to have a really private conversation regarding gates and so on. We've had lots of queries regarding things like contact, because prior to there being any direction from children's services, foster carers were saying, what do we do about contact? And it was the FCA that were kind of, you know, taking a sensible approach and saying, well, do it via Skype, do it via phone. If you don't want to give out your own phone number, but get yourself a standalone SIM card, a pay-as-you-go or something, and come up with practical solutions for them. But also saying that speak to your social worker, and they haven't always been able to get hold of them. Sorry, it sounds quite negative, but really I just want to get across the fact that it's not been easy for them. On a positive, we received 2 extra payments, £100 payments, which were greatly received and, you know, really appreciated by all foster carers. That was a positive that came across. Alison mentioned pupil premium. There was also a payment for child made from pupil premium, but we're now getting questions asking, so seeing as, you know, foster carers have educated these children at home for the last 5 months, what's going to happen to the rest of the pupil premium? Is some more of that going to be given to foster carers, because they're the ones that have been doing the educating? So they have to ask that question, so there you go, I'm asking it. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is with regards to the laptop. Now this seems to have been very, very hit and miss, because some people are saying, oh yeah, my kids have just been given laptops, and others are saying, how do we go about getting a laptop? My children haven't been given laptops. I think Sam is an example of having young people in placement who desperately need laptops but haven't received any. So it seems to have been inconsistencies and a lack of communication for us as well. I'll be quiet there, see if Sam has anything to add.
No, you're all right, Paula. I was just going to say, yeah, I have not even been contacted about laptops, and obviously I have a child that's got ADHD, so it would be nice to have known about them rather than finding out through other carers. But I agree with Paula on that it has been extremely difficult, especially keeping a child in, even on the early times where they were only allowed out for an hour. The children we usually look after want to be out all the time. They've got countless energy, and to be stuck indoors and they don't really understand why, has caused, you know, some major problems with a lot of carers and, you know, the relationship with the children, because they think they're being punished and they don't know why.
Well, thank you for those questions, Paula and Sam. I don't feel reticent. I know one of you, Paula, you said you were a bit worried about raising these. Don't be worried at all about raising any questions like this, because this is what this forum's all about. But thank you. I mean, perhaps Jeanette and Alison can come back on some of those for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've not underestimated the impact of COVID for foster carers. I know it's been really challenging. There are a few things that you've raised there, like the laptops. I don't understand why your social workers have not spoken to you about laptops, but I will definitely pick that up. I will pick that up tomorrow. I need to get a sense of which children really have not had them. So I think that's a piece of work for Jeanette and I to do tomorrow, if that's okay, but we'll definitely pick it up. The other thing is the not being able to get hold of social workers. Again, I think Jeanette and I will need to take that back. If you would it help maybe to have a call with you both tomorrow, myself maybe and Pam, to get some idea of who's reported the things to you so that we can pick them up directly?
Yes, you can do that. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, obviously throughout this, yes, myself and Sam and other SCA committee members always remain very professional. Always try to give like very professional answers type thing, and and we have very often answered reply that is following the COVID guidance. So it comes like contact. Follow the COVID guidance, contact your social worker. If you can't get hold of them, contact the child social worker, contact the manager. Last time we do try to remain positive, but we're not, I think we're more open when we're talking in this forum than what we are when we're talking to the foster carers. But yeah, by all means, we can have a separate conversation and we can go through. And also, I think there's also that thing where foster carers will talk to us where they won't necessarily tell the social worker why have I not had a laptop or whatever, but they'll come to us and ask us and we say we don't know. So yeah, but definitely we can pick this up another time. That's fine.
Yeah, and can I just point out there is some social workers that have gone above and beyond. I mean, from a personal point of view, I've had absolutely no issues with my social worker supervising or a child social worker, but I do know some carers have gone, what do I do about this? Child wanted to sleep over, and because they're constantly watching the news going, oh, well, we can go sleep over now if we're in a social bubble. But they seem to think that they can be in a social bubble with like 20 friends. They kind of like alter the law according to what they want. And it's very difficult for us to go, no, you need to be doing this. Yeah, well, I don't want to do that. I don't care. And when they're coming back into your family and you're not sure where they've been and what they've been up to, it kind of makes things really, really hard. But I've got to admit, we know full well there is some foster carers that have struggled to get hold of social workers. But on a plus note, I want to say that the two I have been absolutely fantastic. I've been able to get them whenever I've needed them.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, everyone's kind of trying to prioritise all of the work all of the time, aren't they? But if we know about individual situations, then of course, I'm sure Alison and Pam will follow those up. Every child who has a social worker, a statutory social worker within our organisation is entitled to a laptop, so that will be looked into as well. So, there's a brief form that social workers need to complete, and then arrangements can be made to collect those devices. So we need to know who hasn't got them. There are a number still outstanding, I will admit that, so they do need following up.
Thank you.
Right, are there any other questions? I noticed there's a few comments on the messaging about laptops and things. Does anybody want to say anything more about the laptops or any of the other issues raised in these updates?
Hi, yes, it's Charlotte. I think Julie Gunn's asked me to just comment on that because I've had some involvement with the laptop project as well. I mean, it did come somewhat out of the blue, I have to say, the announcement, and we had to move very quickly, so it wasn't expected by the local authority. Social workers were able to request laptops, as Jeanette's explained. Any child, young person with a social worker, they could make a request. And can continue to do so. In terms of school, the comment about schools and ordering laptops, that is only for disadvantaged year 10 where the school is an academy or part of a multi-academy trust. So for the year 10 disadvantaged element of that project, The local authority were responsible for our maintained schools that have year 10 disadvantaged pupils. So those devices have gone out to those schools. With regards to the pupil premium, what we did in the summer term was we did make the payment to foster carers. However, we're quite concerned around what happens in the new academic year because children have missed so much. So what we said to our schools, because the children weren't all attending, even though in some cases they were able to attend, and for good reason in a lot of those cases, is we've agreed that the schools will be able to claim additional funding in the autumn term to put in place additional interventions that children might need at that point to support them when they return in September.
Right. Is everybody okay with that, or any more questions or comments? Okay, then on that basis, then we move to the next one.
Sorry. I did.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yes.
Earlier.
Yes. Go on then, Maureen. Yes. Sorry, I missed you.
Just as an aside on the laptop issue, I think there's been a big issue from government full stop about laptops in schools and everything. So it's not been that easy for the council to delay it. And if Paula wants any satisfaction, for a member trying to get hold of an officer during this period has been almost impossible. So it's not only social workers who've not been, because they've all been on conference calls or whatever. But the issue I really wanted to raise, and it'll be something that Paula would be concerned about, is that obviously we're now in the summer holidays, if anybody would believe it's summer, and we have a range of activities normally. Because of the high rates, and I know there's news flying about all over from government about restrictions not being lifted currently in the borough, of some leisure centres and things like that not opening from this weekend. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with the summer activities that we have planned, which is really important for foster children and particularly those vulnerable children who may still be at home. So I'm not sure you can answer the question, but it's an area of concern that I'm now raising, because a lot of these children would have had free school meals and other things like that. And I know it's really an important time for foster parents to allow the children to go to activities during the summer holidays, and we specifically target children in care. So I don't know if there's any update on what's happening about the summer activities programme, particularly for our local children.
This is Paula. I did speak to Blackburn Rovers. Blackburn Rovers are looking to run, it's not Blackburn Rovers actually, they're doing it at all different centres, and they were looking to run some kind of scheme where they would have, obviously this was prior to the Blackburn outbreak or whatever, but they were looking to provide, they were calling it something almost like a lunch club type thing, but where they would have activities on at all the different centres, different locations around the town, where people could go and do some activities and get something to eat while they were there. Now, obviously, this conversation that I had, there was, when things were looking a bit better and things were improving, whether that's still going to go ahead, I don't know. Ironically, I mean, Maureen knows this too well. We've started having queries from other foster carers asking, because, this time of year, ordinarily I'd be sending information out to carers saying, and this is going on, and we've organised this, and we're doing this, and we're doing that. And obviously this year I've not sent anything like that out. So carers are asking, will there be anything for the children? I've even asked people asking me, will I be able to take the little ones to the park? And my answer was, you need to watch the COVID news, and government guidelines, because at the moment, no, there's not a lot, and like I say, it's hard to plan. I'm building on the back of that, what myself and Sam and Alison have just said. We've just had 5 months trying to keep the kids in and trying to keep them entertained and trying to homeschool them, and now we're phase 6, in some cases 7, because the staggered going back to school, up to 7 weeks, another 6 to 7 weeks. We're trying to entertain these children and keep them safe at the same time without having any activities, and it really is difficult because we don't know. We've no crystal ball because nobody knows what we're going to be able to do and not going to be able to do. But as far as organising anything, we haven't organised anything.
Can I come in then?
Oh, go on. Yeah.
Thanks, Ron. It's Julie Gunn. I did put my cue up earlier, and again, my camera's not working, so apologies for that. I did want to say my thanks. I wanted to pass on my thanks to the foster carers and for their unstinting dedication to our young people and the way that they've been flexible and adapted to this ever-changing situation. But the conversation now has moved on, and I just wanted to just give you as much of an update as I possibly can, in that what we're talking about in Blackburn with Darwen is we've seen an increase in cases, of course we have, and that's in some respects we can see this as a positive because we've been testing, we've been looking for cases. So in that sense we want to be as prepared as possible, and it kind of speaks to what we've been doing across the whole of children's services in education, in all the things that Alison and Jeanette have just outlined to us in being prepared and reflexive towards a situation. In terms of the summer activities, as things stand at this moment, and please be aware, as we have to be, that it is a dynamic situation and things are changing apace, but please be aware at this moment what we're advising is planning on providing those summer activities. So obviously the partners you've already mentioned, Paula, but also Youth Zone and our other partners in the Strategic Youth Alliance through the Spring North programme funding that they've secured. That we continue to plan for those to happen. The situation is dynamic and it is changing, and as soon as we have any other kind of information, you will get that information as soon as we have it. You have my word for that, because it's important that we plan and prepare as best we can. I appreciate the need for our young people to be able to get outside of the home and conduct as near normality as possible under the circumstances. So the process is under review. It is, as I say, it's a fluid, dynamic situation that is under review. We are, I suppose, the evidence is there, isn't it, in terms of when we're reopening leisure centres. We're not going with the national reopening date of this weekend. We're staggering that, we're delaying that for good reason. And the most important point about that is because of the safety element. We need to make sure that we're opening in a way that's going to suit Blackburn with Darwen, not just because the government has decided it's a good idea, because it might be a good idea elsewhere, but it might not be a good idea everywhere. So I'll stop there for now, but as far as I can assure you that we are being reflexive and we are planning to continue with those face-to-face activities. But of course, if we get advice from Dominic Harrison, who has been working alongside Children's Services from day one, if we get other advice, we will have to obviously adhere to that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Julie. Is there any other comments before we move on? No? Well, thank you for everybody, especially the foster parents, because it's always useful to get their input as well as a corrective sometimes. Right, the next one is the virtual school, and I think that's Joe Siddle and Charlotte Hesketh, if they've got. The other thing I'd just like to point out and remind you actually again, and I know I mentioned it at the beginning, the people who are coming in on the phone aren't necessarily seeing the table. So if you could sort of at least draw out the highlights and bear that in mind when you do your presentation. Thank you.
I will do. It's just myself. Joe's actually away this week, so having a well-deserved rest, I hope, because it's been a very challenging time for all of us. So I was asked to come and report on the attainment data, because the last time I spoke to you, we wouldn't have had the comparative data from the national for children looked after and the national comparisons, and we do have that now. So the way reporting for children in care educational attainment works is it's for children who are in care for 12 months or more on the 31st of March in the year in which they sit their exams. So in this report I'm covering children in care on the 31st of March 2019 who've been in care for 12 months or longer, and it's the results obtained in the academic year 2018-19. Okay, so we will start with early years foundation stage. So this is the end of the reception year in primary school, and the children are teacher assessed around their development at the end of that key stage. So the measure is whether they've made a good level of development, and they have to hit their goals in certain areas. So I'll caveat all of this data with the cohort. It's all about the cohort and the size, and obviously when we've got very small cohorts it affects the percentages, and that can be a good thing for us or it can be not so good. So for ourselves, we had 6 in this year group, 33% boys, 50% supported for SEN, and 83% of them educated in the LA. In terms of achieving the good level of development, 50% of those children achieved that. Of those that didn't, so the 3 that didn't, 1 just missed out on one of the areas, so they missed one of the literacy goals for writing. So, but they got all of the others, so they just missed out on that. 1 was on a care order at home who had poor attendance. There was an ongoing issue with mum getting the child to school. She's now actually moved into another placement and is thriving. So hopefully that will help her move forward with her development. And the 3rd one was supported at SEN support, but has since moved on to an education, health and care plan. Quite a complex case. The child moved to an adoption placement which broke down, and then came back to the local authority and back into care. So currently in year 1, but is now on their 3rd school, which is not something we hope for. But he's making good progress, but didn't meet the standards at the end of the key stage. You can see, if you can see the table, so we were slightly above the national figure for looked after children at 50%, achieving a good level of development. The national was 48%. Is that okay on early years foundation stage? We move on to year 1 phonics. So in year 1, pupils undertake the phonics screening test, and the idea is that they test their ability to decode words, which in turn helps with their reading. If they don't meet the expected standard in year 1, they usually retake the test in year 2, so they have another go at it. So in terms of this cohort, for the virtual school, there were 9 in this group, 44% boys. Quite a high number at SEN support and EHCP, 33% and 22%, and 67% of them receiving their education in Blackburn with Darwin schools. We had some good outcomes here, so 77.8% of our virtual school year 1 phonics children working at the expected standard, which was higher than national at 64%, and still a gap between BWD all schools and national all schools, but actually not so big as we see in some of the other areas, so that was really positive. Of the 2 who didn't achieve, one of those children has already had an EHCP because of their learning needs and struggles with all aspects of learning. The other was supported at SEN support, and again moving to an EHCP currently, had a complex start to his life in terms of having a school move, and was subject to a special guardianship order, and that broke down as well during that time. So had a lot going on during his first couple of years at school. If we can move on to key stage 1. So key stage 1 is the end of the infant phase in primary school. 10 children in this group. quite interestingly, it's very boy heavy, so it's 70% boys, and we know nationally, not just for children in our care, generally boys do less well than girls academically. That was quite a big difference to the national looked after figure at 53%, so significantly more boys in Blackburn with Darwin. And also a very high percentage of children supported at either at SEN support or with an education, health and care plan at 60% of the cohort. And again, that's much higher than the national figure for looked after children at 48% and 15% just in Key Stage 1 generally. So with that in mind, the children are assessed using teacher assessment, and they do take some tests which contribute to those figures. So for the virtual school, we were slightly under the national looked after figure at 50%. The national figure was 52%. And for writing and for maths, we were slightly above at 50% of the cohort achieving the expected standard, which I think, given the context, is quite positive given our higher rate of SEN within that group. For Key Stage 2, so this is the end of primary school, and this is where it gets a little more complex, and our children situations get more complex, and that has had some impact on this. So at Key Stage 2, attainment is based on tests and some teacher assessments taken at the end of primary school. So you'll know about you'll know them as SATs that the children take. Levels are long gone now, and the outcomes are based on a scale scored, and the pupils are measured against the national expected standards. So if we look at the table there, we've got the first measure is the combined reading, writing and maths, and that's really the headline measure. So in the virtual school, 40% of our children achieved the expected standard in all of those areas, which was slightly higher than the national figure for looked after children. Then in reading, writing and maths, so the separate subjects, we had some variation, so we were just slightly below in the reading test at 46.7% compared to 49%. The writing, which is teacher assessment, 40% compared to the 50% nationally, and in maths 46.7% and 51% nationally, and that's quite unusual for us in the borough in terms of maths. That tends to be a stronger point. I think in terms of writing, sometimes that comes a little bit after the reading anyway for some of the children. Just in terms of looking at the reasons where we've not achieved, so we had one child who got 2 of the 3 but didn't get the writing. So she just missed out on that, but had made very good progress overall. I've mentioned the higher proportion of SEN, and that does have a significant impact. You know, our children are struggling with learning, then they are going to struggle in the tests. And I know that there were some particular issues in terms of the accessibility of the reading paper for some of the children in 2019, and quite a number struggle with it, not just for looked after children, but more widely, and the schools reported that. And then we've got the various home circumstances that some of our children were experiencing at the time. So one of our children was in respite care during the SATs. The placement was very fragile and breaking down. He really didn't want to take the test, but did, and he is now in the process of moving to an independent special school because he's really not coped well at secondary school. Another one, in a care order at home, there were significant issues with his sibling who was also at home. During the SATs week, a number of incidents with the police involved, which I think quite clearly would have some significant impact on his ability to then go in and take a test. We had another child who had an EHCP and has now moved on to special schools, so managed primary and mainstream, but struggled to the extent that he needed a special school for his learning. And one of our very young unaccompanied asylum seekers who didn't quite make the standards, the expected standard, but actually achieved amazingly well, considering he had very little English when he came here. So in the couple of years he's been here, made massive progress, and I have no concerns about how he will do. He just needs more time for his language acquisition to be able to achieve those national standards. So that is Key Stage 2. Interestingly, the boys' underperformance was significant as well. So of the 9 who didn't achieve, 7 of those were boys. And then Key Stage 4, so this is the end of secondary school, so when the young people take their GCSE or equivalent qualifications. So 23 in that group, 56.5% boys, 26% at SEN support and 13% with an education, health and care plan, and just a little over half educated within Blackburn with Darwin schools. I've just outlined a little bit of the information. Some of these measures not everybody is familiar with. Obviously they've changed in recent years. So the Key Stage 4 measures now, the old 5A Starter C, including English and Maths, all that's gone. It's now the Attainment 8 measure, which is the average achievement of pupils in up to 8 qualifications. I've explained a little bit more about things like double weighting. It's quite complicated, and there are certain qualifications that count and some that have to be discounted if they're doing certain other qualifications, and there's a whole raft of guidance around that. So it's the best 8 really is the easiest way to look at it. The Progress 8, this is really a school measure rather than an individual pupil measure. So what it does is looks at where they were at the end of primary school and compares their achievement at the end of Key Stage 4 to those who had similar prior attainment. So again, it's quite a complex way of calculating it. So an average progress score where generally in a school the young people make expected progress for their prior attainment would be 0. So a Progress 8 score of -0.5 means that the school's average is half a grade lower than students who made the same progress. And then the GCSE grades, many of you will know this, they're in the process of transitioning, so they're now measured as grades 9 to 1, with 9 being the highest. A grade 4 is considered a standard pass, and a grade 5 is a strong pass. People do like to try and compare them to the old grades, which we're not really meant to do. But if you think of the grade 4 being around about the old C and a grade 5 being more a CB level, that might help just get an idea of what that means. And one of the key measures is whether they achieve that in both English and Maths. And we had last year a really impressive year for our Year 11s. We were above the national figures for looked after children by some significant way in all the measures, including the strong passes in Maths and English. Again, our girls outperformed our boys. We had our first grade 9 from one of our young people, which we celebrated. Trying to think about why these results were so much better than we've seen in some previous years, although the trend generally is that they are improving. But again, I would caveat that with it's all about the children in the group and their experiences at that time that have an impact. So I would say what's made it different this year is the gender is quite balanced. There's not a huge difference in boys and girls in the split. We've got a lower SEN than usual. So 39% compared to the 40% for nationally looked after. But that is still much, much higher than the national for all pupils, which is around 14%. Obviously, the Attainment 8 and Progress 8 scores are based on the young people taking 8 exams. If they only take 7, they get nothing for the 8th slot. So that impacts on those measures. And I think in that year we had more young people who were able to sit at least the 8 that counted towards those measures. Quite often it will be the young people themselves who ask, can they not do a subject because they're struggling, they're finding it's too much, and schools will be accommodating around that, and we have those discussions with them and we agree those decisions with them, and it's the right thing to do for those young people. Generally, those who didn't do as well were the ones who had less placement stability. So we come back to those figures that Alison and Jeanette talked to you about right at the very start. More placements and came into care when they were older, so in their teenage years. And that is one of the more significant factors in terms of their outcomes at Key Stage 4. I've just put a little note on the end there. When we measure achieved any qualification, in these national measures, it's the DFE approved qualifications that are recognised for the purposes of attainment tables, performance tables. But many of our SEN pupils who are in special schools, who would never access a GCSE, do achieve nationally recognised certificates. It's just they're not within those measures, and all of our young people achieved at least one qualification at the end of their Key Stage 4 last year. So that's a very whistle-stop tour. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments. I'll try and answer.
I've got a questioner from who's Councillor Brian Taylor. I'd like to ask one.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Right.
As a corporate parent, those figures, those achievements seem, on the face of them, quite worrying. Now, I know a lot of these pupils and students, our looked after children, have had troubled backgrounds, but I would like to see their achievements being close to the rest of Blackburn with Darwin. Is that an unreasonable standard that I'm asking for?
That it isn't unreasonable. That's what we strive for all the time. I think whether we will ever get there is the big challenge, and that's where we work really closely with our schools to look at getting it right for our young people, with our what our foster carers are doing to support the children at home. There are lots and lots of factors around that. I think the biggest challenge is where young people have to move schools. That's difficult for any young person. But if you're having to move your school and your home because you can't live where you were living anymore, that's really difficult. And often what we're trying to unpick is many years of a neglected education until the young person's come into the care system. So it's those gaps that we're trying to achieve as much as the learning gaps, and often we need to address the emotional needs before we can even start to look at the educational side of it. So absolutely, yes, that is our goal. We want to at least be as good as and achieve as much as everybody else, but it is a massive challenge.
I fully understand the emotional problems that these children have, and how we've got to overcome those emotional problems. But I would still like to see us striving to get closer to the Blackburn with Darwin figures. Thank you anyway for your answer.
Thank you.
The next questioner is Councillor Andy Kay.
Hi, thanks, Chair. Can we just go back to Key Stage 2?
We can.
Table. There's something I'm not quite, well, it went past and I didn't quite understand what it was going on about. Yeah, on the IWM, it talks about 40% for the virtual school and national at 37. yet on the other three, we are lower than the national average. And I'm just wondering why that is, because it's not computing in my own head.
Yeah, it is a strange one. It's just where children have achieved in some subjects and not got the alignment in all three.
I'm not quite sure I understand that, because why would ours be different than the national average? But
well, there's different number of
the other three.
Our percentages. Obviously, we only have 15 in our cohort, whereas nationally there's many more children. So one child in our percentage figures makes a huge difference compared to those.
Right.
So that's probably why.
So it's a scale thing, really. One makes a big difference either way.
Yeah, so one child in our will make a significant difference in our percentage figures.
Okay. Just really to follow up what Brian was saying about how we can get our performance better, or our children's performance better. I suppose it is, whilst we're striving and all the rest of it, what is it that we can do? What more input can we put in that will help more? And I appreciate that might cost more, but do we actually do we have a plan to be able to do that, or is it just going to come depending on who turns up on our doorstep?
Well, it is very child dependent because they've all had very different experiences, and we need to meet their needs. Obviously, the schools, many of the children are in our schools. So in Key Stage 2, we had 73% of those in our schools, but we also have a significant number who are out of the borough, and some of those young people are quite far away. So that makes it more challenging to be able to work with them and support them. But the key thing that we do, and you'll have heard me talk about personal education plans before, and one of the reasons we've been really pushing to get those completed and to get those to be a quality document, is that is about schools and social workers and the virtual school really capturing what's going on in that child's education and what we're doing to help close some of those gaps. So that's a really critical part of it, and what the interventions are. So we talked a little bit about pupil premium earlier. So part of what we're asked to do within the PEP, the schools are asked to cost out any interventions that they want to provide that will benefit the child, and also indicate what the impact of that will be. And then they would review that and demonstrate that impact the following term. So we look at that on a termly basis to try and track that through. If things aren't working, the discussion is at the meeting. So this isn't working, what else can we do?
Okay, is there anything that's happening within the virtual school over the next few weeks? Perhaps to better plan or to support more?
So we don't generally offer within the school holidays, but during term time what we look at is offering support through things like the Kit McGrath Study Centre, where we offer additional tuition for our children and young people, and we start that mainly with Year 11 and Year 10, but we do extend that down into our Key Stage 2 as well. Obviously that was put on hold during COVID because those are face-to-face sessions, but we've just discussed with Kit that they're able to provide that through an online forum. So there'll be online tuition, so that will be starting in the autumn term. We also work really closely with groups that have been happening, again, working with the schools around things like transition, so Year 6 to 7 transition, because obviously that's been impacted as well, particularly for the current Year 6. So looking at how that will work well. So one of my team has been part of the planning around that and contacting carers of Year 6s to talk about how they're feeling about moving into secondary school and whether they're going to need some additional support. So we do have 2 education support workers who do direct work with children and young people in schools. So and quite often they would support around those transitions where children are feeling a bit wobbly about it. And also with our educational psychology team, so we commission a full-time equivalent educational psychologist to work and prioritise our children. So they will help us with the schools unpick some of the underlying issues to address those emotional needs so that they're ready for learning.
Okay, and finally, have we given any support to parents and carers over this 6-week period that they can help the children?
So yes, so Paula will I hope tell you that I did send out some resources that we thought might be useful, because obviously the schools were setting work for the children and young people, but what Paula was telling me is that obviously the different schools, children were getting in different experiences. So we did make some resources available which signposted carers to different resources that might be suitable for different ages. And also we've done quite a lot of the contacting that Alison talked about in terms of particularly our green children who were at home with carers, just to see how they were getting on and to follow up any queries. And we've also supported quite a lot with returns to schools. So it might have been initially, initially our children in care, there were only about 5% attending at the start of COVID, even though potentially they could have all have taken up school places. And as I said before, there was very good reason for that, and completely understand. And I think our carers, I think it was amazing that they wanted children at home with them and felt it was the right thing to do, even though we know that's presented them with lots of challenges. But as time went on, what we found was some children were needing to go back, that they were finding it difficult being at home. So what we were able to do is work with the schools and with carers to get those places right, because again, some of our children struggled with how different school was when they did attend. So we needed to look at that and get the balance right. So we did things like a part-time arrangement that worked for them, and we're able to get that balance right. And that is again one of my concerns as they return in September. School's going to look a bit different than it did when they last attended in some cases. So we need to make sure that we address those needs. And I'm really confident that our schools have done a massive amount of work around things like a recovery curriculum to help all children, but particularly our looked after children. And what we've done is try to build some of capturing that information in the PEP ready for the autumn term.
Okay, cheers, thank you.
Okay.
Right, the next on the list is for a question is Councillor Maureen Bateson. Maureen?
Yeah, thanks a lot. First of all, I do want to pick up some of the on some of the issues Andy raised, but just on the tables, I know it seems a bit pedantic, but you put gender and then in brackets boys. Why don't you just put number of boys and number of girls?
It's just the way when we pull the data off the system, that's how it generates it. That's purely why.
Yeah, I'm sure though you can just alter it. I just find it, I just don't like it like that. So I just think they should be separated out. But that's just a I don't see why I should have to work out how many girls there are.
Okay.
But picking up some of the things Andy was talking about, have we brought down actually which schools perform better and get better results for our young people?
Not on a school by school basis. We don't. That would be a very. I'm not saying it's impossible. We would be able to do it for Blackburn with Darwin schools. It would be much harder for the out of borough, because we're working with such a large number of schools.
Let me make it simpler then. Do our schools in Blackburn with Darwin perform better or worse than schools out of the borough?
There's very little difference between the two, in all honesty.
We have had in the past reluctance of some schools to send in updated reports about young people, you know, from the corporate lead in that school. Have that got any better?
In terms of so in terms of the PEPs, we do get those, but in terms of the governing bodies, I don't actually get those reports. They don't come to me. They're asked to present them to the governing body. They're not obliged to send them to us. We ask them to send them to us, but they're not obliged to send them to us. So we don't always get those reports now.
there's not actually.
What majority of what percentage of schools actually send them to you?
I don't know off the top of my head, Maureen. I don't know. I'd have to go in and ask that question.
Okay.
Not very many send them into the local authority, to be honest.
Maybe that's something we could pick up at certainly with our BWD governors.
Yeah, we could.
And you talked about, you know, maybe some additional support, and I know you mentioned the organisation that we do use. Have we thought about using maybe other organisations in a different? Some kids need stimulating in different sorts of ways, not just set additional work, but maybe learning a different sort of. Now you've only mentioned one organisation. Do we look at different organisations or different ways of bringing in children to increase their learning capabilities?
Yeah, so that's just what we do as a virtual school as a whole, because obviously most of the funding goes out to the schools. We don't retain any funding. It's all distributed to the schools based on the PEP. So we encourage schools to find the right interventions, and lots of them do that, and do that in different ways. So the study support we offer is just one thing that is complementary to what's being offered through the school, and lots of our schools are very creative in terms of what they offer to our children and young people. We've also been exploring the idea of mentors, mentoring that some of the football clubs have offered, and we were just getting that off the ground pre-COVID, but obviously at the minute that's on hold, so we're hoping to explore that a bit further.
As long as you don't send them to Burnley, that's okay.
Not Burnley, you're okay.
Right, the next questioner is Julie Gunn.
Thank you, Chair. I just really back to Brian's point, really. I think Charlotte is absolutely right. We should have that aspiration to make sure that we're closing that gap between our looked after children and the rest of the children in the borough. I do want to draw your attention though to the if we compare what we have, what the levels we have of success for our children in Blackburn with Darwen compared to the national numbers for children looked after, there's quite a positive, generally quite a positive story. And I think Charlotte's right to identify that there has been a closing of that gap. That aspiration is there. There's no question that we want to close the gap between what the rest of the children in Blackburn with Darwen do. But we also have to be mindful that the lives that our young people in our care are having sometimes present barriers that they need to overcome, and we need to be mindful of that. And Charlotte's already indicated that varying children have varying backgrounds and experiences, don't they? And so this cohort might be a particularly strong one, the next one might not be, the next one might be even stronger. I think it's really important that we see these children as people, not just as a cohort of learners. But I think there is a positive story in terms of the way that our virtual school has supported our young children in our care, and there's a lot of learning to be done as well, and a lot of reflection to be had as well, isn't there? And a lot of challenges we've got that have come from Andy Kay in particular and Maureen in terms of how we continue to improve that support that we're offering. So yeah, just you know, there is positive. There's no room for complacency, and there's absolutely an aspiration to continue to narrow that gap between what our children looked after do compared to the rest of the children in the borough. Thank you.
Right, well, thank you for that, Julie. I'll make one observation before we want to move on, obviously, because we're taking all a bit of time. Is that I remember at the March meeting we had figures for the number of children that were placed outside the borough, and it was 166 out of 402, which is quite a big chunk. All right, there will be some kids, say, for instance, who have been placed, you know, living with parents or foster parents or whatever in Oswaldtwistle who might go to school in Shatterworth, but it gives us a sense of the level of children that the problem we've got with children outside the borough. And certainly, we, as an authority, we've probably got more control over the primary sector than we have of the secondary, because most of the secondaries are academies now. So in terms of direct pressure, we can put, we've got governors on most of the primary schools. So I'm not saying that's, I'm just saying, just putting it into context really from what we heard last time, that it must be quite a struggle when we're trying to get schools which don't have much of a relationship with the borough to try and lean on them. You know what I mean? It's much easier for us to lean on our own schools than it is on anybody else. Anyway, with that passing thought, perhaps we move on to the next one, which is the participation update from Jaffer Hussain. If I've pronounced it right, I apologise.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you very much. My update this time is a verbal update. I will send round a brief paper to Wendy to circulate to you all. So just 6 or 7 different kind of pieces of work that I've been concentrating on since we last met. Unfortunately, as with everything COVID related, voice has unfortunately had a knock-on effect. It's had a knock-on effect on voice. It's still ongoing in some way, shape or form, but probably not as regularly. So you might remember me saying at the last meeting that voice started meeting weekly from the youth zone. We've actually moved that online, and after some consultation with the young people, they felt that weekly was too often. And what they wanted to do, because there was a lot of time being spent in front of the screen, interestingly, for schoolwork and various other bits and pieces, connecting with friends, family, contact, etc., that they'd rather meet monthly. So in the 3 or 4 sessions that we have had, we've done some really productive work. So our young people, alongside the Blackburn with Darwen Youth Forum, developed some wonderful postcards which have gone out to all children and young people across the borough through schools, but also through social workers, with some really key positive messages about staying safe and about looking out for each other, and that in fact if they felt in any way, shape or form unsure or kind of not safe, kind of key contact numbers that they could contact. We've also done, or I've also done a piece of work on behalf of Charlotte, exploring kind of the educational impact of COVID on children and young people. And again, some really interesting findings that came out of that in relation to how children and young people were actually missing that kind of time of being in school, being with their peers, and also being in a structured space where they could learn and give back to each other. And then a couple of weeks ago, myself and a couple of colleagues in the in the review and quality team met up with young people socially distanced at Darwen Knott Street, and we delivered a session for practice week, where again we asked children and young people on their views around kind of their experiences in relation to contact with social workers and other key professionals, and how we could continue to improve that communication moving forward. So it is my hope that voice will continue to meet monthly, and as and when we can start to get back together socially distanced or otherwise, then voice will begin to meet more regularly. Unfortunately, junior voice hasn't taken off, and that has just been based on the circumstances that we find ourselves in. But it is still a priority of mine, and I'm working with the care leaver team, so our leaving care team, to develop some sort of mechanism that our care leavers can be part of shaping the direction of the services that they're receiving. In saying that, interviews and recruitment and selection of key personnel has continued, and over the last kind of 3 or 4 months, young people have been really pivotal in ensuring that we appoint the right people, so that we appoint the right people to work with them and their peers. So we've had around 5 or 6 different interview rounds for a range of roles that are forward facing, really, and from manager level all the way down to kind of frontline, and that's been great, and the young people have really enjoyed continuing to be part of that process, and I've commented that that's been one way that they still felt connected to participation and the local authority as a whole. I've been tasked to do some research around digital engagement tools, so I spent a considerable amount of time over the last number of months looking at various different digital engagement tools and conversing with colleagues up and down the country, finding out actually how are they using digital to continue to engage their children and young people, and in particular those children and young people in care. And that's paid dividends in terms of us now looking at an internal mechanism that we can develop through Microsoft Teams that will allow us to really engage as many children and young people as possible in and out of the borough using digital tools. And as and when I've got an update on that, I'll absolutely provide that. I've been also linking in with various different regional and national initiatives, finding out actually what's happening and how can we bring some of that best practice to Blackburn with Darwen, and probably more importantly, how can Blackburn with Darwen shape and influence some of the programs and mechanisms that are being delivered in other parts of the country. And one of the elements around that is young inspectors. So I'm currently at the very initial stages of developing with colleagues across the service and our third sector partners a young inspectors model, which we're hoping will enable children and young people and key professionals locally to be able to evaluate services. Now, you'll all be aware that we've got a really strong relationship with Investors in Children, and we hope for that to continue. This will be added to that as a complementary program, and like I said, it'll really give us the onus to be able to review services, evaluate services, provide recommendations in a way that ensures that services are continuing to provide adequate support for our children and young people all year round, really. Many of you will be aware that my background is in youth work, and I've also spent a considerable amount of time in the voluntary sector. And at the start of the pandemic, I reached out to my manager to kind of explain my experience and expertise and to say that I'd like to add value within that sector in particular. So over the last few months, and I know Councillor Gunn's already mentioned the Strategic Youth Alliance and their plans, but over the last few months I have been supporting the Alliance to look at how I could add value to any of their initiatives and continue to be that conduit really between the local authority and the Alliance at a time when either colleagues in young people services might be stretched to capacity and or might just need a bit of additional capacity. And finally, the champions are continuing, and it's a massive testament to our participation champions for continuing to do the great work that they're doing. They're still sending me in wonderful reports which highlights that even in a pandemic, the voice of children and young people is being listened to and acted upon, which is great. And again, I'm in the process of developing an annual report because, believe it or not, Chair, I've been here just over a year now. So what I'm hoping to do is by September have an annual report for you all to review, so that you can be aware of what are the activities that we've managed to successfully deliver over the last year and what are our plans for the coming year. So as I said, I'll put all of that in a paper so that people have got something to read as well, and I'm happy to take any questions. I think you're still on mute, Chair.
Julie, you've indicated you want to ask a question.
I do, thank you, Chair. I'm just checking. I don't know whether Sam or Paula wanted to say anything. I'm just aware that they don't have the queue function, so just interrupt if you do. It's very difficult just listening into a meeting like this, isn't it? So I've left a gap for them. There's a couple of points, Jaffa, I'd like to follow up with you at some point, and particularly in terms of the young inspectors model. If that, as you say, supplements the Investors in Children. I know that Investors in Children does have a cost attached to it, so I'd be interested to know what the cost attached to the young inspectors model would be. There's a lot. You know, you've outlined quite a lot of what you've been doing, and one thing that does concern me is that the junior voice is still yet to form, and I just wondered if you could give us some indication of what you're doing in the meantime until that forms, to make sure that that particular group of young people are still being consulted with and still having an opportunity to express their feelings about their own experiences. Particularly, I think at this time of during COVID, where children may or may not be attending school and you know, getting out as much and socialising as much as they were prior to COVID, obviously. So I think that would be something I'd be interested to hear more about, please.
Absolutely, Councillor. So there's a couple of things that we're doing. One is that there has been an participation operational group set up, which is made up of team managers, people like Jeanette, Alison Hanson, and Denise Lynch, who's my manager. And really, that is so that I've got I've got the support needed to be able to ensure that some of these groups can get up and running as fast as possible. Now, that is on our continued agenda, and it's something that I need to work quite closely with the social workers on. At the same time, I'm well aware that, bless them, they're doing loads of other stuff. In saying that, one of the things that I have been doing, communicating quite regularly, so probably twice a month, is sending out an email to champions with a range of resources that they can then disseminate to the teams, and hopefully that will get down to our foster carers as well. And within that, there are age appropriate activities, so it's about making sure that actually there's a way that our children and young people can be kept occupied and can have something to do during this time. And at the same time, some of those resources allow us to get some of that feedback back to us, and they're coming from a range of national organisations, like I mentioned. So it's kind of tools that are working really well, and tools that we know we can work through with our children and young people, so that we're getting the voices back in. And then within the next couple of months, my plan is to have the junior voice set up in a much more structured manner, so that it's not just down to the champions disseminating information down to their teams, but actually they can meet a bit like senior voice on a much more regular basis. In regards to the young inspectors, because it'll be delivered in-house, I don't believe that there will be a very large cost, if any cost really. So it's going to be myself who's going to be overseeing that, with the support of our Champions Network. And part of the what's been really great during the last few months is that myself and Liz Clarkson over at Young People Services, who has responsibility for participation as well, we started to work much more closely together. And it's starting to pay dividends in that our young people and the young people who attend the forum, i.e. the youth MPs, are beginning to build a stronger relationship. And so we're hoping that through these two services and through the champions and our third sector partners as well, we can develop a really strong programme. One of the conversations at the minute is about how much Investors in Children cost the borough. And part of my thinking is that I really would like that money to be reinvested back into our local young people and into our services. At the same time, I'm well aware that Investors in Children gives us massive kudos with the likes of Ofsted, and for our third sector partners, it gives them kudos with funders. So it's about getting that balance between actually a really reputable kite mark in Investors in Children and something that's organic and led by children and young people and professionals of Blackburn with Darwen.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask a quick supplementary question, Chair? When you're disseminating information through your participation champions, what mechanism do you have to check that? What's the feedback back up to you in terms of how it's getting to the right people?
So I will be checking in often with managers. So that was one of the reasons that the participation operation group was set up, was because we were mindful that messages weren't being filtered down, so they were often stopping at that champion level. One of the other things that I've started to do is to include all senior managers, including heads of service, which I know for them it'll probably be another email. But for me, it's hopefully that will then cascade itself down to the ground. And the third is then just checking in with champions quite regularly. So I have calls with all of the champions roughly about a month. We haven't met as regularly as we like to meet during the pandemic. And that's something that I'd also like to pick up in the coming weeks. It is one of the things we've realized about the champions role is that as with anything, because the champions role is added to the day-to-day role, really, it's not part of the job description, and often people do it because they're passionate about participation, is that we get varying levels of interest and varying levels of support, and that's something that I know myself and the operational group are keen to kind of look at, scope out, and look at how we can come up with a really good solution that will mean engagement by all champions, really, whether that's training, whether that's support, whether that's having a really defined role profile, which I've just developed. So we're looking at various different mechanisms and approaches to make sure that we've got a consistent level of kind of engagement across all champions.
Okay, Thank you. I think that's something perhaps we can pick up, Jaffa, and you know, making sure that it's not just the champions that the messages are going to. It's the young people, the children that they're intended for, and how we capture that. So yeah, thanks. Perhaps we could bring that back. Thank you.
Well, if nobody else has indicated questions or comments, so can we move on then for any other business?
Can I just say something?
Oh, sorry. You're all right. That's fine. Yeah, carry on.
When Jaffa was talking, then who are the actual champions?
So the champions are colleagues who have been identified by each key service within children's services, as well as a colleague in each of our third sector partners who has been, like I said, identified to take the lead on participation. Now, it's really important that I stress that point, that they're taking the lead. So really, they're the coordinating, they're the linchpin really of their service. And they're the main point of contact I have for each individual service as well. Now, of course, if a champion is in a particular role and then they move into another role, that the champion role doesn't necessarily automatically transfer with them. And so some services might then say that we want to identify a new champion. But typically it's one person who kind of has got that coordination and really pushing the participation agenda at all times, and someone who I can liaise and coordinate activities with. So
who do you have on foster carers that's a champion?
So for fostering, we had Tracy Mosley. Yep. And with Tracy moving to leaving care, we now have a new recruit, Debbie Redhead.
Right. Do you not think it might be advisable that you actually have a foster carer as one of your champions as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Happy to look at that. Yep.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. And as for, you know, like you're sending information, obviously
Yep.
you're sending it through children's services. If at any point you've got information that you want to get out to carers, if you email me as the Foster Carers Association Secretary, I can easily send that information out for you.
Fab. Thank you for that, Sam.
All right, no worries, Jaffa.
Any more? Sorry, I apologise for jumping the gun earlier. But any other questions before we move on? No. Is there? The last item is any other business. Is there any other business? Nobody's indicated they want to speak, so I assume there isn't any. Right.
Chair, you just muted yourself.
Right. Which bit did I? The next meeting's on Wednesday, the 11th of October at 6 p.m. And thank you for attending.
Thank you
very
much.
Thank you. Sorry, it's been a bit ragged in places. That's my fault. So, right, bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.